Okay, we are live. Let me just quickly pull up the chat on my phone. Okay, we're good to go. Alright. Won't wait too long. I think this may be a little longer of our standard webinars. So, let us get right into this. So, hello everyone. Welcome to another webinar Wednesday for Go Bigger. What are we covering? Why? Well, glad you asked, because in today's webinar, we are covering the steps after test case execution. And I'm your host. My name is Benjamin Taylor. I work for Go Bigger, a German IT company specializing in test automation. But more about us after this webinar. What do I mean by steps after test execution? Well, I'm talking about what we need to do following that we have tests running locally on our device. What happens past that point? We've written the tests, it all goes well, but then what? And indeed, just to set our sort of position, our mood here, we have our tests. This is a pretty small one. We're looking at only 10 test scenarios. Everything's green, it all runs good. Serenity says yes. Now what? Well, now the fun begins, or at least a lot of more of our test automation and QA work than we may originally think. Because in this webinar, I want to take a look at some of the tasks that we need to do. Specifically, I want to take a look at how do we check what we've written is actually correct. This is going to be our first sort of point of, yeah, our test passes, but is it correct? How do we define that? And then, okay, we've made something correct, but what happens after a local pass? Surely we're not just shipping our laptop to the client. No, we need to make sure that it actually works properly in the environment we intend. And what does that actually entail? Following that, okay, it's worked, it's done everywhere, but we're not done because we need to look at what reports we need to create and potentially update. And finally, once we've done all that, we can finally rest and relax, right? No, because now we need to make sure that other people are aware of what we've done. So who needs to be aware once we have finished our tests? So let's look at our first section of this webinar first. How do we check that what we've written is actually correct? Because we've gone green, isn't that enough? Well, no, not necessarily. Just because our test went green doesn't mean that it is actually correct, because we need to look at several key aspects. First, are we actually testing our goal? Anyone can write a test that just goes green. It may not even check for something. It may not assert something. But even then, are we asserting the correct thing? Or are we just trying to check some other aspect of our test, which isn't actually that important or even relevant to what we're looking at? Then, do our keywords and functions do what we intend? It can be quite easy to write a keyword with a single goal in mind. And as you're writing it, as you're like, ooh, I should look for this case, I should check out for this case, and then you get a keyword at the end that actually isn't what you're intending to do. It isn't where you started from. It may accomplish it in some way, but maybe it actually isn't what you're wanting to do. And then finally, in this section, we want to look at our test data and make sure it's proper. Proper is a little difficult thing to define, so let's go over that when we come to it. First though, are we actually testing our goal? In tests, of course, we should always have a specific goal in mind. This could be our happy path, that our basic good path where we say, yes, we return to 100, whatever we wanted to accomplish, very basic login process. Yes, we're able to log in, we're good. But what was actually the feature that we wanted to test? Was it just the happy path that we wanted to look for? Because if so, great, then, but was it another path? Was it another one that says, actually, we wanted to look at what happens, and we should look at what happens when the user doesn't isn't able to log in. They've tried 5 times on a valid username or email. What should happen then? Should their account be locked out? That was actual feature, so we need to make sure we're testing that properly. Then, what bugs did we need to keep an eye on? These could be known bugs that we've known about and have apparently been resolved. These could be potentially new bugs that we need to keep an eye on as well. What's the format of the data that we're looking at, and how does it go through and interact with our program? If we can have a bit of an idea on what bugs are present in the first place, then we're probably in a pretty good spot of making sure that our tests are correct. As long as our tests, keep these bugs in mind and don't just assume any return is good. Let's actually make sure that a return that we get back is correct. And then finally, a really important one actually, that happens in a lot of projects is, have we tested this elsewhere already? We're testing these. It's really easy to get caught up in going, yeah, I have a brand new feature. I'm going to make a test for it right now. Excellent, the test passes. Great. But are we testing that somewhere else too? It's really easy, especially if you're building if the new feature, for example, is in the middle of a process. It's very easy to be like, yep, we just need to run this, make a brand new test for this in the middle process. Whilst in the meantime, actually, you've already been testing this in the middle process. It's just been ignored, or it's been mocked in some way so that the process wasn't running. But now that it is, perhaps this is actually already working, and we should feel confident that it is. Oh, that we don't need to do any further tests for it, I should say. Perhaps we should still examine this. Maybe it should have a specific test for itself. But maybe it's already been rigorously tested elsewhere. Then let's look at our keywords and functions. Do they actually do what we intend? What I mean by this is, does each step of our tests actually do something that we want? Do we look at, does an individual test step just accomplish some sort of side task that isn't that important, that we don't need to know about? Remember our levels of abstraction. We should make sure that at the highest level, which is our test steps, we should make sure that our steps are readable and understandable to essentially everyone. And if they're unclear, or if we don't actually know what they're accomplishing, then the question needs to be raised, do we get rid of it? I've had that same situation this week in one of my projects where I had a test step that I had not written, that I examined, and I go, I'm not actually sure what it's doing. I'm not sure how relevant it is to the overall testing criteria. And so, if it's not doing what we intend, and it's not doing something in general, just get rid of it. Safely, of course. You want to do it safely, and you want to make sure you have a clear understanding of the whole ongoing of your testing, of your test setup. But if it's not doing something, do it. But if it is doing something, then let's have a look and think about how universal or reusable, our keywords and functions actually are. Can we reuse them in multiple situations? Remember, the less points of failure we have, aka different keywords and functions, the less of them we have, the easier it is to identify where failures are, because it could be a bug in our test code, which is also, of course, something we need to keep an eye out on. Since we're looking at testing code, for the most part, we shouldn't worry about our bugs too often, and we shouldn't worry about developing any bugs, but still something that we really should keep an eye out on. And the rest of our testing steps, so making sure that not only are they doing what we intend, but also that they're properly testing something or doing something in the first place. Normally, by answering those questions, we'll have a pretty good idea if there are any bugs in our testing code. Then, now that we've checked our keywords and functions, we've made sure our tests make sense, let's have a look at our test data. Is our test data proper? And what I mean by proper is that we want to see the behavior we're expecting. We should look at our test data and make sure it includes that behavior that we want to see. If the behavior that we want to see isn't present in our test data in the first place, then we're doing something wrong. So of course, first thing, even before we've written the tests, we should look at whiteboard testing. Have we actually sat down and had a look at the process flow and said, yes, this test data is giving us the outcome that we want? Or have we just said, it looks good enough, this should probably work? Especially if we're checking for unique error cases or edge cases, it's really important that we have proper test data that will actually exhibit that in some way. And if our test data doesn't exhibit that, then that's when we turn to mocking or stubbing. So we can try and force those cases in some ways. But that's a more advanced topic that I would redirect you to one of our previous webinars about. Then with our test data, we need to look at our test data and if it's shared or stored anywhere. Because shared, actually, really key thing. If we're looking at a piece of test data that we use over and over in our tests, then it really matters if that data is changed in some way. Because if it is changed, or how it's changed, it doesn't impact how it can be used in other tests. Remember, we really want to try and make each individual test agnostic or independent of every other test. No matter if we're running our whole test suite of hundreds of tests or just a single test case, it should be running perfectly fine. So we need to make sure that if we change or use our test data in some way, it doesn't have any knock-on effects of what's happening next. But we've done all this. We've done all this now. We've said our test is correct. Our test data is correct. So it works on my machine. Let's ship it out, says the tester, who is literally about to send their laptop to their clients. We don't need to do anything more after a local pass, right? Well, no, we really can't. Because we can't just leave it at a pass. We need to think about what other environments are there that we need to test on, if relevant. We also need to look at any conditions that would potentially stop our test from running there. Maybe you have several environments in your CI/CD pipeline, but maybe you can't run your tests in all of these. How do you determine that, and how do you ensure that your test doesn't run where it's supposed to? Where it's not supposed to, I should say. And if we get to that point, then how do we decide that something can actually be skipped over if it shouldn't be run in that environment? How do we decide that? It's pretty easy, potentially, from the actual implementation standpoint, but how do we decide if something shouldn't be run? But first, let's talk about the other environments that we have to test. Because hopefully, in a proper CI/CD solution or just a proper software development solution, you don't just have a single environment that you test to. First of all, that sounds really awful for testing as you're developing, or as the developers are going about developing. But that sounds really awful for how do you're testing always on a live system. That sounds kind of dangerous. So, and before we get to any CI/CD pipelines, even locally, is there a dev or prod environment or a QA environment that you can access and run your tests on? Remember, our tests don't just run on QA. Our tests should be part of the entire CI/CD pipeline and process. So, can you access these environments yourself? And can you actually do the test there as well? Even locally on your machine, can you access these? And, of course, run your tests. So that's sort of running against these other environments. But I also want to ask you, and something that you should keep in mind, is even just remotely, how do you interact with these environments? How do we progress from our local tests to this dev environment or even prod? Normally, there is a CI/CD pipeline that manages this, but then we still need to ask the question, how do you interact with it? Say if a test is breaking on review, how do you check that? How do you examine further of what's happening when a test breaks on review? Do you just have to look at the reported logs, test logs from a run? Or can you dive deep into the review system itself to look at the system logs? Maybe, depending on the sort of structure of the organization of the project, you may be able to access the system logs yourself, or maybe you are just stuck with the basic test logs that are generated. But you need to know this first of all, and you really should try and test against these before you call your testing done. Following that, let's look at any conditions that would stop our test from running in development or in prod. Because perhaps we're relying on mocks that aren't present. In some projects, you may only have mocks at the low level, maybe mocking in between systems. But once you move up in your environments, you'll probably want to start connecting those different services and systems together. And so we're not relying on mocks. And maybe some of our tests then that fully rely on a mock can't be run in those environments. Or maybe we're looking at third-party systems. And of course, if we're looking at different environments, we also need to think about authentication and just data in general. Do we need different data when we're looking through our different environments? That's a really sort of tough question. And it's one you have to be intimately familiar with your test, with your entire just code solution and project to sort of even understand and realize. Authentication is kind of an easy one. But it's still something that you have to properly think about and go, actually, yeah, how do I know what environment data I need for my different environments? Or maybe I just need different data, test data in general, and how do I break that down in my tests? And finally, if we look at an environment that we can't run something on, how do we decide if we can skip it? Because, especially when we're testing in between systems or multiple components, there may be risks associated with skipping it if we don't test on how it actually connects to each other. And so there is no easy way to sort of analyze risk. Well, yes, the easy answer is any risk is unacceptable, but good luck getting a lot of stuff done if that's how you're testing. Let's focus on the real world in which, yes, we do have to take risks. Because risks are spread out over our tests that we perform. Because if we're only looking at a single test for one feature or just one bug, that's a lot of risk to have on one test. Can we spread that out? Maybe we're looking at behavior that can exist over a wide variety of test data that exists in different environments. Yes, more work for us. We'll need to prepare test data for different environments and the like, but it reduces the risk, even if we're only still running a single test on each of these environments. And we also need to look at what other services that we're communicating with. Because yes, if we are reliant fully on a mock or stub of some kind or some pre-canned responses, then yeah, we can run our tests there. But once we hit the real world, or maybe even real data, maybe something that we should look at and go, I don't have control over how this is responding, on what kind of data it's giving back to us, or when it's giving back to us, perhaps even. And we should still do some general tests to make sure that yes, what we're currently doing, how we're currently working, that is correct, that is the correct way, but we should still think about if the tests in general make sense on these environments. And once we've finished answering this, then we're pretty good. Our changes, our tests have been pushed, our system is live, we're done now, right? It's over, we're done, we're good. No, Because now starts the more tedious part, some might say, of being a test engineer, because now it is project care time. Because now we need to think about, okay, what bug reports need to be updated for our tests, or for our project in general? Do we need to look at our test data management repositories? Is there anything there that we need to update, including what test data is used on what tests? And finally, of course, we need to ensure that our tests and features are aligned for traceability purposes. So I know I'm already running a little out of time. I know we still have 10 minutes, but we still have more to go. So I'll go through these ones a bit faster. There's not as much to cover as these are all highly project dependent. But first, let's talk about our bug reports. So, do we have to update any of our bugs? Because have all of our bugs been resolved? Maybe we had a bug report previously that this is what we were actually testing for. We were testing to make sure that the bugs have been resolved. If they have, perfect, we can close out these bug reports in the proper format. But maybe in our testing or otherwise, we found new bugs that we should report. Maybe the test went green, sure, but when we looked at the logs, we saw behavior that was unintended. That's when we can write a new bug report and say, yes, the test was green, but we weren't actually testing for this itself. So let's make new tests, and we need a new change. Plus, especially if you're working with a live system with a wide variety of users and different reports there, you won't have a bug-free project. You'll still have some bugs. And so even after you've finished your testing and you've shipped it, it's in QA or it's in prod or it's wherever, let's have a look back and identify what bugs are actually still present. Maybe a bug was resolved because it was just some offshoot of this other thing that got fixed. Maybe, but you need to go back and re-identify that. Then let's look at test data management and the repositories that we use to manage our test data. Because have we used new or even altered our test data from previously? If we've used new ones, we should make sure it's updated in our repository. If we've had to change some in some way, then we also should make sure that's updated and also see what tests that affects. Apologies. Then we need to look at understanding should only specific data be used with some tests. And this is primarily when we need to look at error cases or other isolated behavior. Especially if in those lower environments we're mocking some kind of responses for specific test data, this should be made well and clear in our test data management that, hey, this piece of test data will always respond in this way because it's mocked, because it's stubbed, because whatever, or it will exhibit this behavior that we are testing for. Therefore, it should not be used, for example, for a happy path because it won't generate that. That's something that we need to keep an eye on, ensure that our test data management skills are up to date. And the last little bit for this section, what reports do we need to create and update when we align our tests and features for traceability? Now, hopefully, this isn't actually something that we really need to be too concerned with, because hopefully it's done automatically. Hopefully, in our tests, we have some way of indicating how or to what feature it's related to and ensured in our tests there. Or hopefully maybe you're working with CI/CD pipeline that's really smart and can link between the different tests and features that you're doing. Hopefully there's minimal effort on our side of what needs to be done. But we should of course still ensure that this link does exist. Even if it does, we need to make sure that in our specific situation, it is. It's very easy for something in that connection between multiple services to break down and for tests to no longer be correctly tagged or even tagged in general. And this is especially true if we're looking at bug tickets. Remember, bug tickets rely on traceability. So we need to make sure that there is a traceable resolution. If a developer has said, oh yeah, I fixed this bug, then we need to make sure of that. We need to tag their fix, need to tag any tests that test that fix to make sure that yes, indeed, this bug can be closed, it's been resolved, and if it opens back up and again in the future, then we know how we can go back and start investigating it. But that's it. So at this point, we know that our tests are correct, we have it on whatever environment we need, we've updated our reports, project is updated, and we're ready to start our new testing activities. Right? Well, no, because I think we've forgotten something. And unlike this meme, well, like the meme really, even if we've forgotten it, it doesn't mean that it isn't important. Because we need to communicate. And who do we communicate to? Well, we need to communicate to our test managers. If you're a test manager, you should communicate to yourself, or at least to other people around your level and seniority. We should also communicate to our business analysts. They need to be kept up to date on how we're testing and what we're up to. And maybe not directly, but of course we should also communicate to our end users. We as QA have a really close relationship to our end users, so we should make sure that they are kept in the loop about what's going on with us. Because really, remember, your end users are the one who are actually affected by any bugs or new features, so they should be kept up to date on how things are progressing. But first though, for our test managers, we should probably inform our test managers that we've finished our task. Why should we do this? So they can provide us with a potential next task. Yay, more work. But maybe they have priorities. They can inform us about these priorities that we need to be aware of and we need to look out for. Perhaps something new has come up in a project that we need to keep an eye out on, that we need to start being proactive about, rather than just whatever other task that we were already thinking of a solution for. Let's go back to our test managers and just be like, okay, I've done this. You can say I'm gonna start focusing on this area, but don't be surprised when they pull you back and say, actually, let's focus over here for now, because this is going to be really big, and the sooner we can get started testing it there, the better. But it's not just our test managers we need to keep an eye out on. So we also need to look and inform our business analysts. Because our business analysts should hopefully be really excited about any new features, and hopefully also for any resolved bugs that we've found and tested. Hell, I think they'd even be happy if we tell them that we found a new bug. Remember, if we're finding bugs, we're doing our job as QA. We're stopping these bugs from going out into production, or at least identifying them if they are in production. Can't be perfect, but a found bug is a soon-to-be dealt with bug. Even if that solution, even if dealing with that bug, let's say, means it won't be done. But hey, it means you've done your job as QA. Our BAs, our business analysts, are of course often responsible for organizing releases, so keep them updated. Any new features that you've tested, any just bugs resolved in general, keep them updated. They would really appreciate it, so they can know and communicate to not only their higher-ups, but also to our end users about how things are progressing. And of course, when we talk about our end users, as I said, we're not always directly in contact with them, but let's keep them updated on our testing and development process, especially if there was a bug in production. It's one thing to say in patch notes or otherwise that yes, we've identified this bug, but it's another thing to really say and reach out and be like, hey, we know this bug has been affecting people. We've resolved this in our current version. We'll have a release soon for it. You know, depending on the severity of the bug, it may get pushed out straight away. It may get bundled with other bugs. Depends on the project, depends on the bug, depends on the process. But generally speaking, let's keep our end users updated as well. And finally, if we are working in a live environment with a wide variety of end users, then examine their user-submitted tickets so we can look at some high priority tasks, or at least common areas that come up often in these tickets, especially bug tickets is what I mean. If a bug is only affecting one person out of 100, it's very low priority, even if you think it's really important. But if a bug is affecting 50 people, even if it's not that big of a bug, it's still a high priority for you to go and tackle that. Or at least bring that to your test manager and see what they say. So that sort of wraps it up for our webinar. I know we're running a little bit over time already. I do apologize. But just to summarize it all up, when we have our tests, when they pass execution, that check is only the first step. Because the tests may have finished, but we do not. We have to keep going. Because as testers, we need to provide a very strong and stable foundation for our project overall. And if we can provide that foundation, and if we can provide good tests, then we can feel confident in the software that we're making, that it really will be what the client and end user needs. So that wraps up for today's Webinar Wednesday. I hope you all enjoyed. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them down in the chat below. But as I wait for questions, let me talk to you about us at Go Bigger. So first of all, if you're not already following us, then why not go ahead and follow us on our LinkedIn. You probably already found us through LinkedIn, of course, but why not go ahead and just make sure that you are indeed following us there. And as I get confused by keyboard shortcuts as I'm working with two different operating systems. And I see a question in the chat, I will get to you after I finish this. And if you are interested in upskilling yourself and becoming more knowledgeable in terms of software testing and being a QA, then why not go ahead and check out our available courses and workshops so you can learn what it means to be a proper test quality assurance engineer. And finally, if you want to keep up to date with us at Go Bigger, then why not subscribe to our newsletter of Grow Bigger. We email you once a month, keeping you up to date with not only what we're up to at Go Bigger, but also our available and upcoming webinars, plus any interesting test automation, testing and QA news that we think you should be aware of. So feel free to check those out. And as I've done our little bit here, question in the chat, do I have a suggestion on how to keep track of all the steps to do after the initial run? Oh, well, you can always revisit this webinar to sort of know more. But I think for a lot of these steps, you know, I went into great sort of detail on what needs to be done. But a lot of this will sort of come intuitively, and you will make mistakes, you know? Let's go back to our sort of first step of how do we check that what we've written is correct. Because one of these may be looking at our test data, making sure it's proper, making sure that's correct. Maybe that wasn't. Maybe that wasn't done in one of our, after we've gotten a green check, after we've gotten our pass. We're like, yep, we've tested, we've looked for our feature, any new keywords we added, yep, they're correct. We're good to go, let's push it straight away. And you may find that actually your test data wasn't proper in some way. Maybe you were mocking behavior, or you were sharing that test data with some other test accidentally. This will happen. it happens. And hopefully, when we look at different environments for your test to run on, you'll see that the error is there, and you'll go, oh, actually, it's because of this. Then that gives you time to correct it. When we talk about who needs to be aware, after we've finished our testing, after we've updated reports and the like, this will just come in practice. You'll develop a nature for this. This is not a beginner's guide of how to do testing in terms of you should know all of this by heart. No. This is a beginner's guide in terms of when you begin, you need to think about these parts actively. But as you get into your project, as you become familiar with it, these should be generally second nature of how you interact with your project and development cycle. These should be second nature of, yeah, I already know to contact my test manager after I finish writing the tests, after I finish my tests and tasks. I already know that I should reach out to the business analysts to inform them of what's been updated and what needs to be done next. There is no easy solution. There is no way to memorize all of this at once. But what I hope is that this acts as a sort of checkpoint and reminder. Because if you can remember some of these things, if you can remember what happens after a local pass, or what reports we need to make, even if you forget some aspects, you're still going to improve your own testing quality. And as you gain your testing experience, you will level up, you'll become a senior tester, maybe you'll become a test manager, but you'll have to think about these less and less as you move on. But for right now, if you are still pretty new, then think about this, remember it, and hopefully one day will come in which you don't have to anymore. But I think that wraps us up for our webinar. We're running quite a bit over time, and all good. Happy to provide that summary. So, for those watching, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar Wednesday. We'll be live again in 2 weeks' time with our expert Daniel as we cover our brand new topic. But stay tuned to our LinkedIn, stay tuned to our website, stay tuned potentially to our, actually I don't think to our newsletter. We've already sent one out this month, but stay tuned to learn more about our upcoming webinars. All things go bigger. We're looking forward to seeing you next time for that. For now though, have yourselves a wonderful rest of your Wednesday afternoon, and we're looking forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Thank you, and goodbye.